All right, welcome to class, guys. It's almost the weekend. Yay, thank goodness, right? So really quick, all of you should have grabbed 5 pieces of candy, correct? Okay. Did you really not? Well, if it helps, you're the only one in all 3 class periods that hasn't grabbed 5.
Is it me?
Yeah, you...
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, I thought you got one.
Okay, oh, did you eat one?
I didn't. No, you didn't.
Okay, so you just lied.
I actually told me that I couldn't do it.
Okay, so this is exactly what we don't want to be like. Please do not eat your candy, okay? Because we're going to be doing an activity later with the candy, and you definitely want the candy. You are also the only person in all the years I've done this activity that has eaten the candy.
All the years?
Yeah. So, 5 years, and one person ruins it, so, yeah. Oh, we should do a wall of shame. Oh my gosh, that is such a good idea. Oh my gosh. Mega posters, announcements. Oh, that's a good idea. Okay. Anyways, we might have to do a little wall of shame and put you up on our board. Okay, anyways, couple of things before we get started today. First off, in terms of major dates, there is one new date that you don't have yet, and that is next Wednesday. Every time before a quiz, I do what I call a cram session. Basically, that is where we go over everything you will need to know for the quizzes. So, on this date, next Wednesday at lunch, we're going to have a cram session in here. Anybody can come, and that will allow you to be able to review for the quiz. Okay? And the quiz is next Friday over pre-1492, over American colonization, and the American Revolution. Sound good? All right. And then also you guys picked up a Boston Massacre analysis paper that is due next class, which is 9-5. That is also next Wednesday. One thing about this assignment is that normally we would do it in class, but we're slightly behind. So it'll only take you about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. Very, very short assignment, just because I'm going to reference it in class and I want to make sure you know what this is, okay? So let's grab out our boat notes and we'll get started. That's still good? Yes. Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if it was too low for your head. Okay, we are on the second page. The pros and cons table. We are starting right underneath that where it says labor systems in the colonies. Okay, so again, right below the chart, and we're starting where it says labor systems in the colonies. By the way, this is going back to chapter 3. So chapter 3, if you're one of my textbook readers that likes to be able to connect it, we're going to chapter 3. Okay? It kind of switches around for this first part just because we're teaching it in such a short amount of time. All right, so let's talk about the importance of tobacco. Okay? I would circle the word tobacco and right next to it the word Virginia. That is going to be the major state that is going to become the crucial part of tobacco industry in the entire world. Virginia was the perfect place, had the perfect climate to create a massive tobacco colony. Now, things on here that I would highlight. On the second bullet, highlight significant profits. And then on the last part, or last bullet, directly caused the slave trade. Now, why would people want to be able to invest in tobacco? Easy. It was incredibly, incredibly profitable. You made a ton of money from being able to have tobacco. It was a very cheap product, but one that you can make a lot of money off of. For example, have you guys ever heard of a plant called a truffle? Heard of those truffles? Okay. Truffles are one of the most expensive plants in the entire world. They're itty bitty, very small, and they only grow in 2 places in the world. That is Oregon and Italy. Very random, I know, but only in those 2 spots. And people will train their dogs to be able to sniff out the truffles. People will dedicate their lives to hiking in and out of the hills to be able to find these truffles. And a single truffle, which is about the size of a walnut, is worth about $5,000. Okay? And if you ever have truffle butter or something like that, that is 1 shave, and that is typically about $40 per shave of that truffle. Okay? It's expensive. But it's free. It's a wild plant. You're not allowed typically to be able to actually grow truffles because it's very difficult to be able to grow. So instead, it's free, but makes a giant profit. That's what happens here with tobacco. Tobacco is incredibly cheap to be able to produce, and because of that, it makes a massive, massive profit that people are able to make a lot of money from. However, you do have to have a lot of money and capital beforehand to be able to create the tobacco plantations. Now, indentured servitude. I would draw a line between the words indentured servitude and slavery and say no difference or difference between the two. You want to make sure that you don't get these 2 flip-flopped because they're very important words that mean very different things. So let's start with indentured servitude. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of when people on their gap year after school or in college, they'll go backpack across Europe. You guys heard of people going and doing that? Nope. Well, when you get to high or to senior year and everyone starts saying they're going to backpack across Europe, it's like the thing to do. Well, that's expensive, right? To go live 3 months over in Europe. But then you hear these people say, I only spent $1,000 living in Europe for 3 months or whatever it could be. You say, how do you do that? Well, there's companies that you can find online, these websites, where wherever you go, they will have you work for them for maybe 4 or 5 hours, and they will then pay for your board and your food. And it's a great way to be able to bounce around Europe, but you do have to work for it. Well, indentured servitude is a similar way. These people want to come over from England, but they don't have the money to be able to come across. And so instead, an investor pays for their travel across, and you work for them for 7 years to pay off that debt. Now, it sounds like an okay deal, right? Well, here's the thing. When you were an indentured servant, you were in the north, typically a servant in that house. You did the housework, the cooking. Do you guys remember when we did that ship manifest activity, how there were all those servants everywhere? Those are the indentured servants. Now, in the south, though, they're going to be hard laborers on plantations, treated very, very similar like slaves. Now, here's the thing, though. Over that 7-year period, you're supposed to make back the money that the investor gave to you to come over. The problem with that is a lot of times they didn't want to lose you. So they would purposely not pay you enough, and at the end of the 7 years, they say, well, I guess you don't have the money to pay him back, so you got to work for me for another 7 years. Or, let's say you did earn that money. Well, you don't have any money for a house, food, a family, so you go to the only way that you know how to survive, indentured servitude. Or in another example is the plantations. If you don't pick enough cotton or indigo, or let's say that you don't work hard enough, your punishment is to work for me another 7 years. And so what ends up happening is that people begin to basically use this indentured servitude as another example of slavery. Okay? These people basically become contiguous slaves. Although they have the opportunity to leave, they probably never will. If you look in this picture as well, do you guys notice the kids? Okay? Yeah, kids came over too. Imagine being maybe 9 years old and being that indentured servant for the rest of your life. It was very, very common. Which brings us to slavery. Now, with slavery, I'm going to tell you what to highlight, and then we're going to do an activity, okay? So, things to highlight on this page. Okay? highlight the word triangular trade. Highlight then at the very bottom, middle passage. And we'll talk about what those words mean in just a second, okay? But we're going to go ahead and do an activity. Now, you're going to be leaving everything where you're at. So don't think you have to bring notes or anything like that. We're just going to do this activity. Now, really quickly, if you have any sort of an injury or it's difficult for you to be able to get down on the ground and back up again, I have a place for you to be able to sit. Or if you are a girl or a guy who is wearing a skirt and feels uncomfortable sitting down on the ground, you also have another place that you can go. So I don't want you to feel uncomfortable if it's not doable for you, okay? But on the ground, you will notice a large amount of blue tape. It kind of went wonky. It's supposed to be an oval. You can see I've never done it with 44 people before, so we added a little bit to our boat so it doesn't look exactly like a boat. But this is our slave ship. Each of you are now going to kind of live like what life would be like if you were to come as a slave into the Americas. So here's what you're going to do. All of you need to get not yet, are going to come in and sit inside of this boat. Now it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be close, and I totally get that. Everybody has to have their bums on the ground, so no standing or kneeling. We also have a bunch of people who are like cuddling with each other to try to get more room. Please just solo each other out, bums on the ground, okay? It got really weird last 3A. We had like 4 people on top of each other. It was uncomfortable, okay? So everybody's separated. If you're on the outer rim, it may be more helpful for you to put your bum on the line and then your legs outside of the ship. Everybody just has to have some part in the ship. If you're one of my people who maybe has an injury or a skirt that doesn't want to sit on the ground because of uncomfortableness, you can get on the chairs on the outside rim of our boat. Sound good? All right, so leave everything and get into the boat. And you can move this too. And I want to make sure he can see.
I need more legs. You're not.
Yeah. Well, and if he is in a bad spot, we can always get him to move. I just want to make sure that you ask him if he can see.
Okay, I'll ask him.
Because if not, he can also sit. Yeah, and he can also sit in the chair if it's easier for him, okay?
This is like France. This is the Lance train too. Literally everyone's. This is bad, right? Yeah. They're legit like for 3 months ago.
Everybody uncomfortable yet? No. No, good. That's the right answer. Okay, so I'm going to be passing out this packet. Everybody in theory needs to be able to see this packet around them. You get a solo one, so make sure you grab one for yourself, okay? So when I pass these around, usually it's going to be about 1 packet per maybe 4 or 5 people in it, okay? So this is going to go this whole pile all the way to the back. So just take the whole pile and send it all the way to the back. Remember, no snuggling or punching each other in the ship. No. Put these into the middle. So pass these out in the middle area. Hey, don't call... Why are we calling people idiots? That's not nice. It's not nice. Let's be nice, okay? AT? Hello. Is there anybody who cannot see the pictures? There's somebody right there that has a spare. Anybody else? Or where it's difficult for you to be able to see? Just put it in a pile right there. I'll collect them in a second. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it was going to go across. I'm sorry. Okay, anybody else? Okay, if you have a spare, just keep it for yourself. You can go ahead and look off of it. It's no big deal. We're going to start on this picture. This picture.
Which picture?
Okay, so what you're seeing right here are going to be the trade routes of the different parts of what is called what term?
Triangle.
Triangular trade. How you know it's triangular? It looks like a triangle. Okay? Okay, listen. So let me explain. Hey, this only works, by the way, if you listen really closely because we have a bunch of people in uncomfortable situations. Okay? So starting over in the Americas, this is where the raw goods are going to be produced and created. They are then transported into Europe. And then while in Europe, they're created into manufactured goods, brought down into Africa, and they are then traded for slaves. Shh. Hey, boys. And then those slaves are then traded back and brought over to the Americas to produce raw goods. Now the line at the bottom, which is the place that goes from Africa and goes over into America, what is that part called?
Transatlantic slave trade.
Transatlantic slave trade is the general movement over. It was actually on your notes up here. You highlighted it. The Middle Passage. So the Middle Passage is going to be where the slaves would come over into the Americas. So right now we're going to look at what life would be like if you were going over on the Middle Passage as a slave. Go ahead and flip to the first picture. It looks like this.
This one?
Yep. Okay. So this is showing how you are captured as a slave during this time. Now, it's a very common misconception where people think that Europeans came over to the villages and captured all the Africans. That's actually not true. So in North Africa, they had great trading networks with the Europeans. When the Europeans come over and say, I want a slave, those tribes that have a very good relationship with Europe are going to go into the villages, and they are actually the ones who are going to take those slaves. So it is actually Africans taking Africans. Now, it really became who could take the other people first, because if you were the last one to make an agreement with England, you were probably going to be the enslaved. Now, how they would get these people to come with them. So they would show up into the villages. They would then say, you are now slaves of the English people, you are going to come to us. Do you guys really think that they would be like, okay, sure, I'll come with you? No. So now they have to capture by fear. And this is where it gets really intense. They would typically round up everybody with guns and say, you're going to come with me willingly. Now, they don't want to shoot you, because if they shoot especially the men, you've just lost a slave that you could sell. So instead, if they're not going to come willingly, they're going to take the women, and they typically will rape the women in front of the men. Then, if that doesn't work, they'll take all the children, and they'll typically cut off a couple of limbs. Maybe they'll stab them, make them suffer, until they eventually die. By this point, the men are willing to come. And they begin to leave, and what they're not aware of is as they're leaving out of the side of the village, typically those women and children are then killed and left in a giant pile and burned to death. This is not a nice way of subjugating somebody or hiring somebody. It is a brutal, brutal way of bringing people over into the Americas. Once you're brought over by the Africans, you're brought to the port, to the ships, which is your next picture. Okay? Now, while you're being brought into the ship, you're going to typically be put into what's known as the hull, which is the middle part of the ship. Now, one thing you might notice again about this picture, are there any women in this picture? What about kids? No. The major reason for this is a woman is not going to be as useful on a plantation compared to a man. Right? They're thought of as typically not having as much muscle, not being able to work out in the fields as easily, so they're kind of useless. The other problem too is if a woman gets pregnant, right, she's not going to be able to work because she has to care for this kid. So they're not going to want women. Those women will typically either be kept, typically as prostitutes, not being paid prostitutes, but basically for these European settlers, or they would be killed back at the villages. So it's a pretty ruthless life over in the America, or in Africa, excuse me. Go ahead and flip to the next page. Now this looks a lot like you guys, right? Okay. Now sitting on the top of the ship, they look emaciated, which basically means very thin. You can only see the ribs, right? But in general, they're just sitting on the top. You can see the sun. Are they shackled? No. What could possibly be, though, a problem with this picture? Who do you think actually drew this picture? Europeans or slaves? Europeans. How you can tell? Would you ever have a group of slaves on top of the ship with no shackles on? Because what are they going to do? They're going to jump overboard. They're going to kill you. They're going to accuse of mutiny. So this is inaccurate. But the Europeans aren't going to make it seem like they're bad, right? So they're going to put this out. But instead, if you go ahead and flip to the next one, this is another European showing of what it would be like. How you can tell it's European is, have you guys ever heard of the Italian Renaissance, where we now have different types of paintings? If you look at the man in the center, you can see that he is very buff, right? He's not hungry. He looks like he has a lot of good definition. That's his very Renaissance style paintings, okay? Now the thing is again, does this look like that bad of living space? Not really. You got people chilling out on the ground. You have this guy who's in a bed, right? It's not that bad. But let's look how you really would be like in a slave ship. And we're going to be starting on this one right here. Okay? Now, this was created by one of the owners of the slave ship. Now, on the center ship, you can see at the top there's like a cannon, right? That's the deck. At the bottom, you see the word hold. That's where like all your cargo, your food, whatever it could be in is there. What is in that itty bitty little space at the top? You can see how there's like a little gap. That's where the people are. Now, if you turn your picture sideways, you'll see how are those people sitting? Exactly like you guys. Notice too, how tall is the ceiling on this paper? 3 foot 3 inches. If you look at how tall of our desks are, and you add 2 inches to that, and do a line straight across your guys' heads, that's how tall your ceiling is for your entire journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, if you want to know, by the way, how awful that is, this trip is a 3-month trip. Imagine sitting like this with a board about the height of the desk going across for 3 full months. And you don't move. Yes?
How do they get food?
We'll get to that in just 1 second. Okay? Because it'll make sense when I get to the next part. So go ahead and flip it to the next paper. Now, this is an alternative, more efficient way of getting people across. Because maybe 3 feet is too much wasted space on your ship. So what are they doing in this picture instead? Laying down. So imagine if you guys were sitting just like in the same space, all had to lay down. The ceiling is 1.5 feet above your head, or above your back of your head. So it's right about here, and you're there for 3 months. Yeah, it's a miserable life. Go ahead and flip to the next picture. Which, there's a blank page. Go past the blank page. Does this rendering look like what we've been talking about for the last couple pages? Nope. So who can we tell that this is being created by? Europeans. And you can also tell that at the bottom because it says Lieutenant Francis Meynell. That's not an African name. So we know that this isn't a European, right? But what would life really be like along these 3 months? Let's go ahead and let's get to the gruesome parts. Yummy, right after lunch. Okay, switching to this. Okay. Now this was an alternative way. Pretend that you have a ship that wasn't originally designed as a slave ship. So instead, you have to use the cargo hold to take your cargo across the Atlantic Ocean. Now in this case, you are typically laid across, and this is how you stay for your entire time. How you are kept from going out, because they don't want you to go and cause a mutiny. If you'll just quickly flip it over, this is how you are shackled. So the feet are shackled to yourself, so you can't move. They're like hobbles. Your hands are shackled as well against the person next to you. So you're tied to the feet, and then you're tied to the person next to you. So how do you get food in this situation? Well, typically the person on the far end, whichever end it could be, is given a cup to is about maybe this tall. Not very big. That's filled with broth. Now, if you don't know what broth is not soup. It is water with a little bit of flavoring in it. They would get that cup as well as one slice of bread per day. And the slice of bread is the same bread that they had when they left from Africa. So it could be brand new bread or bread that's been sitting on this ship for 3 months. Now what they would do is the first person gets the food and eats however much they want from it. They then pass it to the next person. So who's going to get the least amount of food? Person at the end. Sometimes they wouldn't even be able to eat to the point where they're the first ones who die. Okay? So that's your first bit of food. Well, the thing is you start to have problems, right? At the very top, okay, again, you don't leave this position for 3 months. What happens if you have to go to the bathroom? You go where you're at. Where does all that junk go? It slides down to all the people below you. Remember too, by the way, you're eating broth and bread every day. You get diarrhea. You get foodborne illnesses. All that is seeping onto the people below you. Additionally, you also are at the bottom of a ship. You're also going to get seasick, right? All that comes down. So who's going to be the first to die? The bottom, yep. They would always say well, that's very specific, but yes, the bottom far end. But yeah, so the first people to die are the bottom. So they would always say the higher up you are, the more likely you are to survive. A lot of these people, though, didn't want to survive because they knew that their lives were just going to get worse from here. By the way, if somebody dies, what happens to their body? It stays there. Yep. So if people start to die around you, how are you going to get food if they're dead? You can't reach across, right? Yeah, so then you start to die once your friends die. By the way, one thing I should say about all this, there are 750 known languages in Africa. All the people, in order to stop them from doing a mutiny, would be mixed up with other people who don't speak their language. You typically couldn't speak to anybody in your ship whatsoever. So imagine trying to survive in this much space. You're having stuff fall on you all the time, and you can't speak to anybody. Right? Scary situation for sure. So let's pretend that you want to fight back. Your water bottle is having problems today. Okay. Now this is what is known as a mutiny. Popular amongst ships. This is basically where either the crew, or in this case the cargo, are going to go up and uprise against whoever's on the ship. Now, if it was something minor, or possibly you were just misbehaving, such as not eating, what would your punishments be? Go ahead and flip to the next one. Now, this is mild punishment. So what they would do is they would attach this mask. Your neck brace is metal and has small little holes in it that these swords go into. The swords lay about 1 millimeter away from your skin, and then they screw it in so it can't move. Okay? Well, here's the thing. If you feel yourself when you talk, you can actually feel your throat going back and forth. So what happens in this if you talk? Well, you don't die. You'll typically get stabbed. It's going to hurt, right? Here's when you die. What happens if you fall asleep? Right? You stab yourself. So this punishment is 3 days without talking or sleeping. And if you sleep, you're going to die. You're going to stab yourself. The swords were put right next to your veins, so you would bleed out in about 60 seconds to 2 minutes if it were to stab you. So yeah, this is pretty awful. But there's a more awful way to be punished. Go ahead and flip. Last picture, I promise, and then we'll get done with this uncomfortable situation. Okay? So let's pretend that you caused a mutiny and they're fed up with you. You may not be the strongest person, so they decide, you know what, we're just going to get rid of you. Well, they would take you and they would toss you overboard. Additionally, let's pretend that they're not making the time they want to make. Ship's going too slow. They would pick the weakest people they think would be the worst or least popular slaves when they get sold, and they would throw them overboard. Or if somebody dies and they end up finding them, which would be a shock, they would throw them overboard. They used to say, if you don't know, by the way, sharks, it's like a cool science thing. Sharks, What are you laughing at? I know science. Okay. So sharks, if you don't know, things migrate back and forth, right? Like fly south for the winter or whatever. Sharks also move based on the heat of the water. They don't like cold water. So they'll go south when it's cold and north when it's warm. Well, here's the thing. In the Atlantic Ocean, they have a really weird issue. Their sharks, instead of going north to south like normal, go east to west. From Africa to the Americas back. Why would they do that? What are they following? The ships. So they would always say that the sharks would follow the ships across into the Americas, and it happened so much over hundreds of years that their migration patterns changed and they went back and forth across the ocean instead of up and down. Yeah, it was a pretty brutal life. Now, in terms of how many died, over the course of the Middle Passage, about 80% would die by the time they made it to the Americas. 20% would survive, but typically they'd lost anywhere between 50 and 80 pounds. I mean, it was bad. Additionally, let's pretend that there was a situation where there was an accident. You ran aground, you hit a rock, you got in a storm. There were lifeboats and the crew would make it out. They wouldn't try for the slaves, and those slaves would drown. There was one time where a ship hit a rock right off the coast. There was plenty of people on the coast and watched the ship go down, and 900 lives died on that shipwreck. Yeah.
That seems like inefficient.
Okay.
Doesn't it seem? It seems to me that the slavers would rather treat their slaves.
Well.
They would be more likely
Yes.
to survive and thus make more money when they got over.
Great, because that's a perfect transition into what I was going to say. So he was basically talking about why would they do this? Why would they make their slaves pretty much purposely less weight, not as effective as a slave? Well, here's the thing. First off, slaves in America sold for about $600 in back then's money. That's the equivalent today of $20,000. That's the worth of a car. Slaves were expensive. They typically only had a lifespan of 1 year once they made it into the Americas. So why would they not want the fittest people? Well, as a slave trader, it really doesn't matter to you. These are just commodities. They are products. I want you to think of it this way, though. Slaves are very cheap. When they buy them from the African tribes, they're worth about 1 cent. Very, very cheap. 1 cent to 600, right? A big profit. Well, imagine if you're a grocery store and you're wanting to have eggs. And you buy 50,000 eggs. And they come, and when you open up the truck, you find that 3 cartons of eggs got broken. Are you going to lose a ton of money from those 3 cartons of eggs? Not really. I mean, you're not really making a lot of money from them, but you still have the 45,000 or whatever eggs left. That's the idea here. When you're buying something for a cent and you're selling the rest of the people for $600 when you get to the Americas, you're still making a crazy, crazy big profit. So if somebody dies, it's no big deal to you. It's kind of the idea of, let's buy as many as we can, knowing a bunch are going to die, because then we'll still at least have some to make a profit. Yeah.
But that still doesn't seem like economically.
Yes.
Like a smart decision.
Yes. I think a lot of people just saw this as a profit is a profit.
But they didn't care about how much profit they made?
Not until the international slave trade is banned. When the international slave trade is banned in 1804, people begin to care more because now there's a limited supply. So that limited supply has to be really good quality. So then they're going to start beefing them up, giving them better food and things like that. One thing, by the way, is a lot of slave owners did not know how bad their slaves actually were. Oftentimes, plantation owners would buy slaves without ever seeing them in person. But if they did see them in person, what they would do is they would actually inject them with liquid that would make their arms seem bigger. So it would make it seem like they're not skin and bones, but they actually had fat on them. Then they would actually take oil and they would cover all of their muscles in oil so it would seem more defined and larger than they actually were. Oftentimes they would give them wigs to make it seem like they actually had hair and that they hadn't lost it all on the trip. Typically they would give them so much food when they arrived, thinking that they would bulk up in the week afterwards. I mean, it was all a show. And it's a cruel show, but it's a show. Okay. I know you're all really uncomfortable, right? You're like, this is the worst thing I've ever done in my life. So, You're going to go back to your seats. Keep this with you because we'll just pass them to the front instead of all having to come up at once. Hey, be careful of Robot. Robot doesn't like to be kicked. Somebody moved it. He kicked it. Don't kick it. Hey, be really careful. You've already kicked it like twice and you're about to hit it. So just be really careful. Take these and pass them to the front of your rows. Pass to the front.
I don't even want to sit down.
Yeah?
I was just taking a nap.
Hey, sit down. So pass these to the front. While I'm collecting these, does anybody have any additional questions about what life was like, how things worked? Anything along those lines you'd like to ask me questions about? Yes?
What was the clothing situation like?
Clothing, typically nude. Now, a lot of this actually had to do with cultural traditions of Africa. Typically, African people at the time would not wear clothing, and if they did, it was typically only over their pelvic area. Women especially, they did not clothe anything up here. It was all open, but that was because there was no stigma, like the rest of the world, against the idea of not having this part covered. So, typically, you would maybe have a bottom, but oftentimes they were just nude. But if they did wear clothing, you couldn't pull it down to go to the bathroom or anything like that. You just went through your clothes. And then you had a question.
What did they do when the mutiny succeeded?
When the mutiny what?
What did the slaves do when the mutiny succeeded?
It didn't.
They never?
No, the only time that it ever, I wouldn't call it succeed, I would call it caused everyone to die. What happened is there was 2 instances that I've read about, and maybe there's more that I don't know. But they succeeded in killing the captain and the guy in charge of navigation, as well as other members of the crew. But then who's going to steer the ship? And so what happened is that those people with those mutinies, those ships just disappeared and never were found again. Those ships, they had, I think somebody fell, if I remember, it was just off the coast of Africa. The people who survived as crew members jumped into the water and got saved by another ship. But then those ships that went across were never seen again. And more than likely, it's because they didn't know how to steer the ship. And they steered it into bad weather, or possibly, if you don't know how to navigate, remember those currents we talked about? You're going to go around and around in a circle with those currents. But as far as we know, there were instances where people would be killed, but those slaves would not fully take it over. There was one single instance that I can think of, and it's not the Atlantic. It actually was off the coast of Florida in like 1830 or something like that. They were being transported from the Caribbean up to the Carolinas. They succeeded in taking over the ship, and they were able to steer it back to Haiti, where they originally came from. And in the minute they landed in Haiti, they were all shot and killed. That's the only one that I know of that was successful, but I'm not a perfect expert on it. But that's the one that I've heard of, is the one off Florida. I think it's actually in the AP curriculum. I think I actually teach it later on. Any more questions about Middle Passage or anything? Okay. So, in terms of slavery and its impact, right? We talked about this triangular trade. This is really where it becomes successful and profitable, is because it's this perfect system of moving things back and forth where you need it to go. Now, a common misconception is people think America was the only slave owners. America was the one that did all this. It's not true. In fact, the vast majority of slave owners actually shipped their slaves to South America and the Caribbean. Only 6% of slaves actually went immediately to the United States. It's not until tobacco comes along, or not tobacco, excuse me, cotton. When cotton comes along, this is when this is going to change to be the most profitable out of everything. Mostly because a lot of these other places are going to have that Native American, or they're just going to abandon slavery out in general. Now, one name that you might want to know about is Equiano, which is on that very last part of your notes. It has his name, Olaudah Equiano, on the right side of the Middle Passage. I would underline that and write source. If you ever see Equiano in the source, you know it's Middle Passage or slavery. Now, Equiano was a slave in the late 1700s. He was one of the last people to come over on the not Transcontinental Railroad, sorry, other class. The Middle Passage. So they come across on the Middle Passage. He's one of the last ones. He actually is sold as a slave owner to the north. And while he's up there, his slave owner is actually very kind. When the slave owner dies, he actually releases him and frees him, and he becomes one of the most successful African Americans in the north. He has a big business. He's very famous. He's rich. And he writes this autobiography about himself. But what happens is the autobiography gives us the best details about the Middle Passage because most slaves did not know English, and they definitely didn't know how to write English. But because he was so well educated, his slave master actually taught him English that he was able to write this. So we're going to read a quick passage from his autobiography. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to totally kick you there. So this is what his sourcing could be like that you would see on the AP exam. So it says, I was soon put down under the decks, and there I received such a salutation in my nostrils as I had never experienced in my life. So that with the loathsomeness of the stench and crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I the least desire to taste anything. I now wished for the last friend death to relieve me, but soon to my grief 2 of the white men offered me eatables, and on my refusing to eat, one of them held me fast by the hands and laid me across, I think, the windlass and tied my feet while the other flogged me severely. So even though they wanted to die, did they let them die? Nope. They forced them. Oftentimes when you weren't eating, they would actually force it into your mouth, shut your mouth, and you either choke and die or you swallow it. It became pretty ruthless on this Middle Passage. So if you again see Equiano, just know it's going to be a Middle Passage reference. Now, a couple more things before we get to the American Revolution. Mercantilism and capitalism. You need to know the difference. Know the difference. Next to mercantilism, I want you to write the word colonial powers. Colonial powers. Here's how mercantilism works. With mercantilism, you have to have a giant empire of colonial powers. In this case, it's England. Remember, England owns India, parts of Africa, the Americas, the Caribbean. With this, mercantilism is all trade interconnected in the colonies. So you are only allowed to trade with English colonies if you're an English colonial power. So for example, we can only trade with England, France, and India. They can only trade with us, except England. England can go all over. But this creates a really big problem because it creates less wealth because it's so confined to the constraints of your individual community. Whereas capitalism is massive international trade. This is what we have now. It creates mass wealth, but also mass poverty. Draw a line right above capitalism and write the year 1776. That is the American Revolution. American changes from mercantilism to capitalism in that year. Because now we're not a colonial power anymore, we can move on. So again, a line right here, 1776. So last thing before the revolution, I want to talk to you about a couple of little rebellions that are going to come up during this time. One, for example, is the Stono Rebellion. What happened with the Stono Rebellion is you had Native Americans becoming frustrated with this colonization. They ended up coming up to a group. They ended up killing that large group of white settlers. It begins to have fear of Native Americans because now they're going to fight back. The big rebellion you need to know, though, is Bacon's Rebellion. So this is a starred one. It's the most popular rebellion that you're going to... Oh, yeah. Sorry. Whoa, I just realized a problem on this that nobody else has picked up. Okay. That's why I keep getting confused. Don't worry. I will fix the problem next class. I'm just going to make a note to myself. I didn't put something in the PowerPoint. I know. The last thing is King Philip's War, not Stono. And I didn't notice it until just now. Okay, I will fix it next class. Don't worry. So, Bacon's Rebellion. Now, with Bacon's Rebellion, this is going to be the first rebellion that is going to be caused by anger towards the British colony, or the British colonial powers. So here's what happens in Bacon's Rebellion. The things that I would star the second bullet, because it gives you a great overview of what happens. Now, with Bacon's Rebellion, you got this guy, Nathaniel Bacon, and he's frustrated. He feels like the English government is kind of imposing a bunch of stuff on people. They're not really having any say in anything. It's getting a little bit frustrating. And so what's going to happen is he is going to go to the slave plantations and say, we are going to uprise. You're going to be freed from your plantations and freed from England. And he goes around and he recruits 15,000 slaves to come and join him on this revolt. Well, what happens is the day of the revolt, he shows up and only 10 slaves come. Mostly because the slaves probably were fearful because there was no laws at this time. If you killed your slaves, their property, there's no murder charges for that. So they were probably really worried they were going to get killed by their slave masters. So he shows up with 10 slaves. They all get massacred by the police. That are about 900 going against him. But what this does is this bottom part right here. The consequence is that now slave owners are going to fear their people are going to rebel. People are going to fear if these slaves know how to fight, they're going to take us over as slave owners. This is what's going to really be big with the Revolutionary War, because they're going to learn how to fight. Okay? We're going to go ahead and transition to the Revolutionary War. So these notes, boat notes are done. And let's go to the American Revolution.
I got it.
You got it? Yeah, we don't know what this one is. It's a mystery.
No idea.
No idea. Okay. If you think this one's too hard, there's one really big one at the end of the year that has like 95. And you can't tell that one at all.
Where's number 1? I found it. It's in a picture above.
One is, so do you see where the 2 is? They already connected the 1 for you in case you don't know how to connect the dots. Yeah, I found this on a children's website, so that's probably why.
Good job, Abe.
Okay. Oh. There was one that I forgot on the last page, but it's okay. Pueblo Revolt. This one is just going to be the Pueblo Indians against the Spanish. So if you ever see Pueblo, just know it's Native Americans. They've asked that one time on the AP exams. So it's highly unlikely you will see it. But just in case, there's your one time. Alright, so all of this is chapter 5. So if you're one of my textbook people, all of this is going to be chapter 5. And 1 second, I forgot to click the robot. Okay. So we're going to be heading into the causes of the revolution today, and then we'll finish it up next class period. So with our causes of the revolution, you will see this on your paper. It's the first bullet. From that bullet, if you will do a bracket all the way down past Pontiac's Rebellion and end it right at the proclamation line of 1763, not including the proclamation line. So again, the very first bullet, all the way down to right above proclamation line of 1763. At this bottom line, if you will write the year 1763 and do little stars around it, make sure you know this date. It's a very important date. We don't love dates in American history for AP, but this is one you'll want to know. And then this entire bracket, if you will label it historical context. On an essay about the American Revolution, they will typically say you may start your essay in the year 1763. However, you have this thing called historical context on their essays, and we'll go over what that is, but it's basically what happened before to cause our now. This is all your what happened before, and we'll talk about the really important. Now, as we go through these notes, you'll notice I confined an 8-year war into 4 pages. There's a lot of things that we'll just skip through without highlighting. A lot of this is just getting you aware of these terms, even if you're not going to see these terms on the AP exam. They're just making you aware, so if we're zooming through this, that's why. Okay? So we're going to start with our first causes of the American Revolution. So, things that I want you to highlight on this. First off, French and Indian War is a double star, very important term. And things that I would highlight. I'd highlight the words expansion into Ohio River Valley. Then conflict over imperial claims. And that's it for this one right here. So you can see we skipped a lot, but that's what I'm talking about when I say going through this fast. So let me explain the French and Indian War. So here's what happens. You need a question? You good? Okay. So France and England both want more land. France wants to push downward into Ohio and New York to take more beaver pelt land. England wants to move north and take over more Canadian land. Both of these two meet into a place that is known as the Ohio River Valley. Now, the Ohio River Valley is going to become the meeting place in the war over this territorial land. Who gets what land, and who gets to decide who gets what land. Now, in terms of the split, you don't necessarily need to know who went with who. What you need to know is this becomes a war with a bunch of other native tribes. And the reason why is because these tribes had good trade networks. They knew who they traded well with and who they didn't trade well with. And so in this case, they're going to split off into who they know that whoever wins, who they would want to be those trade partners with. And it becomes a massive war. Now, in the end, the British are going to lose. Or, no. Whoa. Sorry. It's getting late. It's almost the weekend. France is going to lose, Britain's going to win, and this causes some major impacts. So you can see right here, this is the colonial territory that's been claimed. All of this in the blue was owned by France, and it is now all part of the United States and the English colonies. How you know this is in Canada. Anybody know who's on their money?
George Washington. Napoleon. Queen.
It is. It's Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth I. Why they would have her on their money is because it's that British control over Canada. It's not until they get their Canadian independence that they didn't change their money, but they're not controlled by Britain anymore. So, impacts, and this is really, really important, is this slide. So, things I want you to highlight. Major expansion of its territorial holdings. Tremendous expense. And next to tremendous expense, I would write down debt. Because that's a, thank you, fancy term for that. And then, on the last 2 bullets, you're going to want to star both of those bullets. Massive debt on all sides. And directly caused the proclamation line of 1763. So basically what happens is this war is going to cost today's money of about $700 billion. Very, very expensive war. Unfortunately, this makes the debt for the British colonies and British Empire extremely, extremely high. Now, Native Americans are also going to be impacted too. Remember, they had all of those trade networks, while the people who lost are going to lose all those trade networks. Additionally, all the people who had the trade networks are going to realize that the British Army is not going to feel very powerful, and they're not going to have as much control as they used to have. Now, this kind of shows itself in what's known as Pontiac's Rebellion. So what happens is that this guy, Pontiac, He's a leader of his tribe, and he says, I'm frustrated. We've been doing so well for so long, and now all of a sudden, we don't have these trade networks anymore, and we don't have success. So what he does is he gets together with his group, and he says, something must be done. We are going to forcibly get the Europeans out of our nation. So what happens is he's going to take those people, and they're going to surround a local fort. This fort has about 350 men, women, and children in it. They walk around it 7 times, which is very symbolic. If you know, like the 7 days of creation, this is the 7 days, but in Native American creation. And then they're going to get out their guns, and they're going to begin to shoot, and within 15 minutes, they kill everybody inside. Their idea was saying, if you encroach on our lands, this is what's going to happen, get away. Do you think the Europeans are going to run away and never take over their land? What's going to actually happen, probably? They're going to revenge, and they're going to kill them more and take over it. So it doesn't work out very well for them. Now, proclamation line is 1763. This is your first major cause of the Revolutionary War. I would write next to it, therefore, a big number 1, and maybe circle it. Now, this is not saying this is the most important cause. I'm just doing this chronologically. But when I say what are the causes of the American Revolution, this should be your very first one that you talk about. Things that you're going to highlight on here. You're going to do adjusted alliance with England. So the native tribes are going to attempt to be able to work with England, not fight so much anymore, and become better. You're going to star the third bullet, because that is the definition of this. And in that bullet, highlight the word Appalachian Mountains. If you ever see the word Appalachian Mountains in a question, you know it's a proclamation line question. And then on the last bullet, highlight angered colonists, increased tensions between the U.S. and Britain. So let me explain what happens with the proclamation line. So King George is going to say, we don't want to fight anymore. We just want to be done with all this conflict. Let's move on. So he thinks, I'm going to solve this problem. We know where the natives live. We're going to make sure that people don't go there. So he creates this line, and the line is basically the border of the Appalachian Mountains. This is what creates the permanent colony borders of the 13 original colonies. That's what he's going to say. Everything to the right is going to be colonists. You can live there, buy stuff there, whatever you want. But everything to the left of the line is now going to be Indian country. It is no longer going to be allowed to settle. And if you've already settled past this line, you have to move back across into the colonies. And this makes them angry. You're saying, how can you determine from thousands of miles away where I'm allowed to live and not live? And people get very angry. Now, this leads to a lot of frustration. Next to the Paxton Boys, I want you to write the word rural, as in R-U-R-A-L. This is an example of a rural rebellion against the British Empire. So here's what happens. You have these guys called the Paxton Boys. They live out in the middle of nowhere, right? Out in the rural environments like Tooele or Vernal or whatever it could be. And they're angry about this line. So what they're going to do is they're going to be forced to move because of the proclamation line. They get up and they begin to move west. But as they move west, this is a 30-mile hike for them until they're across the proclamation line. Any Native American that they come across, they are going to kill. And when they kill them, they're not just doing it from a shot far away and moving on. They are slitting their throats, stabbing them in the stomach. Anybody, man, woman, child, doesn't matter. They take all the bodies, bring them into Pennsylvania, put them in front of the courthouse, and say, if you continue to do this and you keep taking our land away from us, your natives are going to be killed. So you thought this was going to solve problems? It's only going to make it that much worse. It's a great example of the rural environment trying to be able to dictate somebody else's life. Now, since you guys seem a little tired, let's pep you up with an activity. Sound good? We're about to eat the candy. That's what every class asks. We're getting there. Okay. So everybody needs their 5 pieces of candy. Make sure you have your 5 pieces of candy. All right, so I need 4 volunteers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on up.
That sometimes happens.
Okay, so all of you are living in colonial America. Hey, I can see your phone underneath your desk. That was really sneaky, though. You thought I couldn't see it. Okay, so all of you are living in colonial America, and I am King George, and you all love me, right? You have to call me Your Majesty for the rest of the year, because I'm super cool, right? Oh, right. That was nice. I like that. Anyway, so you guys are all in my colonists. Now, we just got done with the French and Indian War, and unfortunately, that was really expensive. And I have a problem with that because, you know, back in my nice, big, luscious mansion where I eat the typical 6 meals a day, I mean, it's not very fair to me for you guys to be spending and wasting all this money. And besides, I just made it so that you guys wouldn't have conflict with the Native Americans anymore. I saved you all. So I feel like you need to be able to pay me back a little bit. And I need a way to be able to pay off this debt, so I've decided to create taxes for all of you. Now, we're not going to tax England, because England would be really mad if we did that. So we're only going to tax you guys triple the amount that we would have if we had done everybody in the whole colony and the whole empire. So I'm going to start to impose some taxes. Now, because I don't trust you with real money, that would be really dangerous. Instead, I give you 5 units of wealth. And this is all the money you've ever earned. It's your life wealth. It's going to be great. Now, unfortunately, though, some taxes might come along, and you might have to pay those taxes. And since I'm living off in England, I've hired these tax collectors to make sure that everything is going to go just great. Now, these tax collectors don't have to pay any taxes themselves, so don't collect any for your own self, okay? All right. You guys ready to get started? By the way, you know, it is just an activity. Don't get really emotional. Sometimes we have people trip the tax collectors, okay? Don't get angry. It's not real.
But that's
Okay.
what the reaction was like.
I know that's what it was like, but we're just pretending here, okay? We don't want to get Mr. Bingham in here. That would be bad. All right. All right, so here's what's going to happen. Now, I'm looking over all my colonists, and I'm starting to have some frustrations with you guys. To be honest with you, I'm starting to feel like a lot of you guys are wasting money on things that you don't need. You should be paying me instead. Now, some of you guys are wearing socks, and to be honest, that's kind of a waste. You already have shoes. Why do you need this other random piece of fabric? You don't need that. So if you have any socks on, you owe me 1 piece of wealth, and all the tax collectors, you're going to put that wealth, when you collect it, over on my table over there in a giant pile.
Oh, you've already paid. Socks. So if you are wearing socks.
You are wearing socks.
So give me money.
You can say please.
No, I'm a tax collector. I don't gotta.
You can't say no to the tax collectors. No, you can't. No tax evasion. Over on the table when you've collected all the taxes. Okay. Also, no hiding wealth. Yeah, no hiding wealth. Okay. All right, so as time goes on, I'm starting to get more and more frustrated. You guys are supposed to be my workers, right? You're supposed to be out in the fields making sure everything is ready to go. But you guys aren't really dressed for that at all. I mean, you guys aren't wearing clothes you can go and work in, especially your pants, because pants can be really restricting. So if you're wearing anything longer than shorts, you owe me 1 piece of wealth. You don't like this? Well, you're fine. Get over it. Disappointment is good in life.
How quickly you can roll up
Okay, don't be possessive. It's just candy. Remember what we talked about? Just candy. This is why I didn't give you real money. Then it would get really vicious. Okay. All right. Okay, listen. Also, make sure you're doing your homework after class. Okay. All right, so I'm starting to get more angry at you guys because now you're just being really annoying and frustrating. And there's been this really big outbreak of lice. You see, if you don't know, that's part of the reason why, like, George Washington wore a wig is because people would have to shave their heads because there was so much lice. But unfortunately, for some reason, you guys apparently don't care about lice because all of you guys are wearing really long hair, which is really attractive to that. So if your hair is longer than the top of your ears, you owe me 2 pieces of candy. Hey, it's okay.
Shun the weak. Shun the weak.
Bet you wish you were in Mexico.
Okay. All right, listen. Okay. By the way, if you end up being one of my people who run out of money, you have to go to jail because you are not able to pay your taxes. So jail is going to be either, since we want to make sure she can still video, it's either going to be to the left, over here, or back next to my desk. Either one, you go to jail. Also, you cannot flee from jail or be one of those people. Okay, you have to go to jail. All right? Okay, now I'm looking around at you, and let's just be honest, you're wasteful with your money. I mean, you should be just using it for food and sending the rest back to me, and instead you guys are wasting it on really dumb things. Like glasses, who needs those? Right? Hats, jewelry, headphones. I mean, this is all a waste of money. So if you have absolutely any accessory on, that could be watches, rings, nose rings, earrings, glasses, 2 pieces of candy. Don't be so wasteful. Go to jail. You're fine. No, there's no bail. Life here sucks. I'm sorry.
You're not sorry. You're the king.
Yeah, you're right. I'm not really sorry.
That's probably a good idea.
Okay. Our front jail's kind of full. So after this round, you'll have to go to back jail. Because we don't have there's 2 jails. Hey, now listen, my jail people. Just let you know, in jail during this time, there's no sanitation, no plumbing. Typically, you're living on a floor in mud and dirt, which means you're probably going to die in a month. So you need to all be quiet because you're probably dying of some disease. Okay? Now, for my last tax, I just thought it's the beginning of the year, and I just want to be honest with everybody. I don't want you to get to the middle of the year and realize that there's something I just really hate about you guys. And that's the male gender. They're awful. I don't know what it is about them, but I just can't stand it. So if you're a male, and this is by your school records, okay, we don't want to, I'm just going by, let's just assume, okay? But if you are a male, you owe me 3 pieces of candy. I don't like you guys. I'm sorry. I don't like you. I don't make the rules. I'm sorry.
I don't think so. You are.
Go to other person jail. Female jail is taken. You have to go to male jail.
I'm not going to jail. I'm just getting my cap.
Yeah, you gotta go to jail. Yeah, you still have to go to jail. You can't relinquish your material possessions. You have to go to jail. Okay. Go to jail. Go to male jail. Okay. Okay, listen. Now, couple things that we can notice here. First off, while I'm explaining these, tax collectors, congratulations, it's payday. You guys get 10 pieces of candy each. So if you get your 10 candy and go stand over next to the candy area. Okay. Alright, so listen. Shh. And some of you who are looking down, which I'm assuming is on your phones, just stay with me for a little bit longer, okay? So, here's the thing. Now, first off, were these laws very fair to you guys? No. Some of them were just kind of random laws that I put out there. I didn't really have a say of what they were for, but just random laws, right? Did any of you guys have a say in what those laws were? No. You said yes back there? You 3 boys in the back, you said yes.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so let's try this again. Did the colonists have any say in what was going on? No. You just had to take it. You had no representation. Now, if we talk about money-wise, for the colonists, to think about just the colonists, who are now our richest colonists in the area? The tax collectors, right? They have 10 pieces of candy each. Now, most of you are poor, right? Now, this is why, who is going to be probably the most hated colonist in your area? The tax collectors. You guys heard of tar and feathering? Yeah. So, we're not going to go that far where we're going to go tar and feather them. That's a little much. No, we can't punch either. But, okay, but normally, remember, jail, you're dying from disease. Okay? Especially boy jail. Boy jail needs more disease to make you quieter. No. Okay, anyways, so, if you think about it, that's why you would go and kidnap your tax collectors, tar and feather them, and make them suffer. Now, the reality is, though, is while the tax collectors might have the most money here, who in the entire room has the most money? You. Me. Not the candy area. Me. Because that's mine. But, therefore, who are you all going to hate the most? You. Me, right? Because all of you guys are sitting there in poverty. So this is what you're going to do. And listen closely. This is the honesty policy. Okay? Everybody in the whole room, including tax collectors, only get 1 piece of candy. Okay? Because Miss Ray needs candy for other people too. So, you can, if you have extras, so if you're one of my sitting people, or if you gave away your good candy and you want better candy, okay? Anybody can bring all their extras over to the candy table. You can also then sort through and pick whichever candy you want to keep. Everybody gets 1 of them. You can go sit back down.
Can we eat it now?
Yes, you can now eat it.
I already ate one at the beginning of class.
Yeah, I know. You're a cheater. Did you read the sign that said do not eat?
I read the 5 pieces.
That was the important part.
Hello. 1 piece of candy. Pick your favorite. This is the 1 piece you get. You can also eat your candy. Just remember, wrappers aren't fun to hide places where I have to collect them. So please put them in an area where you'll remember to throw them away at the end of class. We'll get all the wrapper sounds out of the way real quick. All right. Okay. Also, I always get this question because people, for some reason, will eat the candy even if they're like not supposed to eat candy or whatever. You're not forced to eat or do anything in this class. So if you're not supposed to be eating candy, like if you have braces and you're eating a Laffy Taffy, just letting you know, you're not forced to do anything in this class. See, activity candy. Anyways, okay. So, increase in taxation. Okay, I'm going to tell you what to highlight on this page. Almost done with class. Only have about 5 minutes left. Oh, sweet. Who said that? I heard that. Oh, very nice.
They were talking about the candy.
Uh-huh.
Sweet candy.
Sweet candy. Okay, what I want you to highlight on your paper, and again, you can eat your candy, just make sure you're paying attention. Highlight doubled national debt, and that's really important. This is under increase in taxes on the second page. So remember that national debt is going to come from what event? French and Indian War. Your historical context, you have all this debt. You are now going to highlight requires that colonists pay off their fair share of the war's cost. And then on the last bullet, I want you to highlight without direct colonial representation. Now, that's a fancy way of saying the phrase you've heard of, taxation without representation. That's a fancy way of saying that. And then assertion of imperial authority. This is really when the tides change. So this is going to be your number 2 cause of the Revolutionary War. And again, this isn't by importance. This is by what would be a cause that you would sit there and list. Okay? Now, these taxes get really frustrating. People are angry. I made you a list of some popular taxation. You probably are only going to see these as sourcings, and you're not going to be directly asked about these. But there's a couple of them that I want to point out simply because they're those really weird laws that you're frustrated about because you don't get why they apply to you and why you should have to pay them. So, for example, one of the laws is what is known as the Currency Act. Now, in the Currency Act, every piece of money you had back then was called a currency. Now, your currency had to suddenly have a stamp on it, which you can see right here. Now, your stamp actually was about 1/5 of the worth of your amount of money. So if you're paid $1, you're really only getting 80 cents of money, and 20% is going into taxes that go back to the government. And let's pretend, it's a good thing I already have money saved up that doesn't have the stamp. You are told that it is now non-existent money unless you go and pay somebody to stamp it so you can get your taxes. So now you're earning less money than you should be, and the rest of the money is going back to the government. Who has the time real quick? 35? Okay. I'm just going to do loyalists, and then we'll be done. I would do a line in between loyalists and patriots and put difference. More than likely you know these differences, but I just want to point them out. The loyalists are going to be the ones that are going to be pro-England. Now, things that I would highlight on here is I would just highlight African slaves and natives. So when you are talking about the loyalists, really about 1/3 of the colonists were loyalists. But in this case, with these loyalists, you also had a few other people who wanted to be loyal to to England. For example, African slaves felt that if England won, they would be released and would no longer have to be slaves as punishment to the southern states. Natives felt like if the British lost, all the colonists were going to continue to go west and take their native lands. That's why they're going to pair with England. Starting next class, we will start with the Patriots. Sound good? All right, so you can go ahead and start putting your stuff away.